Hello there, and welcome. Today, I'm going to show you how to install a K&N Typhoon intake on a 2017 Corolla. Now this particular intake can be installed on any Corolla from the years 2009 through 2018, as they all use the same engine. Let's get started. First, I'm going to show you what comes in the kit. Included in the kit we have the rubber coupler, rubber heat shield weather stripping, and vacuum tubes, the hardware bag with hose clamps and the necessary mounts, the aluminum intake tube, directions, the heat shield, and the K&N high flow air filter. The necessary tools for the job are both a Phillips and flathead screwdriver, a 10mm wrench, a 3mm Allen key, a 10 and 12mm socket, and the ratchet that goes with those. Now the first thing that we're going to want to do is apply the rubber weather stripping to the outside of the heat shield. This is going to prevent hot air from reaching the inside of the heat shield where your cold air intake is going to sit. You may have some excess rubber when you're done wrapping it, so you just trim the rest of it off and then push it on there nice and tight. Once you're done with that, you're going to want to take some more of that weather stripping and we're going to apply it to the hole that's in the middle of the heat shield. This is where the intake tube is going to sit, and applying this rubber seal will provide more insulation against hot engine air reaching the inside of the heat shield, where your intake filter will sit. Once you trim the excess off, just push the rest on, and that'll provide a nice seal against the hot air from inside the engine. Next, once we pop the hood, we're going to disconnect the negative battery terminal off of the battery. This is going to reset everything in the ECU that tells the engine how much fuel to put into the cylinder per how much air is in the engine. We're going to remove the engine cover, and then we're going to disconnect the vacuum tube from the crankcase. This is done by squeezing the clamp, pulling it back, and then with a little bit of force, tugging the vacuum tube off of the crankcase. Next, we're going to disconnect the wiring harness from the mass airflow sensor that sits on top of the intake. And then, using our Phillips head screwdriver, we're going to loosen the hose clamp at the base of the intake at the throttle body. Once that's loose, all you have to do is place your hand at the base of the intake and give it a good tug, and the intake should come loose from the throttle body. Finally, there's two clamps, one on the right side and one on the back side. Disconnect those and lift up and towards you, and the intake should come loose. Next, remove the stock air filter, and all that's left should be 3 screws holding in the base of the intake. We're going to use our 10mm ratchet and we're going to disconnect those. And finally, there's one last screw on the back side of the intake holding it in. This is the very difficult one to reach, so I use my 10mm wrench to get it started. We're going to speed this up so you guys don't have to watch my half hour of work. And then eventually we're going to move on to the 10mm ratchet on the left side of it. Finally got it loose. Once that's disconnected, it's just a matter of tugging and pulling, and the base of the intake comes out. Next, we're going to install the mounting brackets for our heat shield. You're going to want to use the screws that came in the hardware kit. And first we're going to hand tighten these screws. Once you have them hand tight, make sure that the two brackets are opposed to each other to provide optimal support for the heat shield. And then we're going to use our 10mm ratchet and we're going to tighten them down a little bit. It's important to note that you shouldn't tighten them down all the way because you might need a little bit of flexibility in order to mount the heat shield properly. Next, we're going to take our heat shield and we're going to fit the bottom lip there under the actual intake snorkel itself. Then we're going to do our best to line up the holes. Like I said, it's important to note that you shouldn't tighten down the brackets all the way because you might need a little bit of flexibility to get these holes to line up. We're going to take our screw and our washer and we're going to do our best to fit them in as best we can. It's going to take a little bit of effort to push and pull these parts till they line up. And once we get them fitted, it should slide right in. Next we're going to take 2 lock nuts that come in the hardware kit, and we're going to hand thread them on the bottom of these screws. And we're going to use our 10mm ratchet and we're going to tighten these screws down. We're going to do the same thing on the second one here. It's important to note that I'm using the 10mm wrench on the bottom to hold the nut in place while I ratchet the top screw down. That's going to get them nice and tight, and that'll hold the heat shield in place very nicely. Next we're going to take our rubber coupler and the hose clamp included in the hardware kit. First we're going to slide the hose clamp onto the coupler itself. The easiest way to install this is with the screw facing you for easy access when you need to tighten it. We're going to slide that onto the throttle body. It should fit nice and snug. We're going to go back to the stock intake for a moment and we're going to remove the mass airflow sensor from the top of it. Using a Phillips head screwdriver, just unscrew the top screws there. And once you have those screws removed, the mass airflow sensor should pop right out. There you go. Next we're going to take the aluminum intake tube included in the kit, and we're going to reuse the mass airflow sensor right here. Also included in the hardware kit are 2 Allen key screws. You're going to hand thread those just like that. And then using our 3mm Allen key, we're going to tighten those up real nice. Very nice. Now we're going to install the intake tube. First, you're going to want to put a hose clamp on top of the rubber coupler that's already installed on top of the throttle body, again making sure that the screw is facing outward for easy access. Next, we'll take the intake tube and we're going to slide it into the heat shielding, and then we're going to put the other end into the rubber coupler on the throttle body. Once you have that all put into place, you'll want to take your screwdriver and we're going to loosen the hose clamp so that it'll fit around the aluminum intake. Once you have the hose clamp in place, tighten everything back up again, making sure that both the hose clamp on the intake and on the throttle body are tight. Next we're going to take our stock tube again, and we're going to remove the hose clamps on the vacuum tube that went to the crankcase. Once you have these removed, we're going to reuse them on the vacuum tubing that came with the kit. Slide the tube onto the crankcase, and then we're going to measure it up to the new intake tube to make sure that there's no kinks. cut off the excess tubing. And then test it to make sure that it fits without any severe bends or loops. Once you've confirmed that it fits, remove one side of the vacuum tubing, and then we're going to take our hose clamps. We're going to slide one from the open end all the way down to the attached end. Slide it over the aluminum tube. Make sure that it's good and tight. Next we'll take the other hose clamp, and we're just going to slide it onto the tip of the open end. Slide the vacuum tube back onto the crankcase and pull the hose clamp back up onto the tip of the crankcase. Next we're going to attach the wiring harness back onto the mass airflow sensor. We're going to slide it through the intake hole and clip it right onto the end of the mass airflow sensor. You should hear the clip click and you'll know it's attached. Next is my favorite part. We're going to take the high flow filter, again with the screw facing you, and we're going to slide it right onto the end of the intake tube. Push it on as far as it'll go, and using your screwdriver, tighten down the hose clamp as hard as it'll go. Finally, we're going to replace the engine cover. And we're going to reattach the negative battery terminal. Use your 10mm wrench to tighten up everything. Excellent. Now let's have a listen as to what difference this makes. I'd like to thank you guys for watching this video, and I hope I was able to help you install your new intake. If you like this video, feel free to check out my other videos, or subscribe to my channel to keep up. Have a wonderful day, everybody.